Good morning and welcome to the Daily Planet. As you've been hearing, if you've been following this morning's plenary session, after Monday's assessment of the state of the planet and yesterday's focus on possible solutions, today delegates have concentrated on the challenges of getting those solutions in place. In the next half hour, more on building a sustainable future that has at its heart fairness, equity, good governance and social justice. Hello, in this edition of the Daily Planet, we have an exclusive preview of a new hard-hitting report that tells the world how it must get to grips with one of the biggest challenges it faces, feeding 9 billion people fairly and sustainably. We hear more about the intriguing idea of a human sustainability index, a sort of Dow Jones or FTSE 100 for sustainability, from the man who dreamed it up. Plus, we take you to the movies. We've two wonderful short films for you from the Climate Fix Flicks competition. You wait until you see the climate zombies. Now, let's start, though, with one of the key underlying issues under discussion here, and that's been how to completely restructure the world economic order to one where everyone, rich and poor, old and young, all get fair shares for the future. Most here would agree that fairness and equity are at the heart of sustainable development and sustainable living. But getting it embedded at the heart of governments around the world, getting the haves to willingly share with the have-nots, rich countries to share with the poor, now that's proving to be a real struggle. Someone who's been at the heart of that struggle for a while now is the former director of the World Bank, Dr. Mamphela Ramphele from South Africa. And she spoke very passionately this morning, and it's a real pleasure to talk to her now. Dr. Ramphele, welcome to the Daily Planet. You did speak very passionately about brutality, about what you called self-sabotage from your experience in South Africa. How much is dealing with that sort of problem necessary before, say, a country like South Africa can truly go down on a path of sustainable development?
In my view, this is the issue that South Africa needs to tackle, because we are now 18 years into our democracy, and yet many South Africans still behave like subjects of an authoritarian system rather than citizens of a constitutional democracy. And part of the problem has to do with the wounds that we carried into the new South Africa, which we didn't address, neither on the side of the oppressed or the side of the oppressors. And I believe that what we need right now are circles of healing, where we acknowledge our wounds and we address the destructive behavior which reflects the self-sabotage. Why would a government such as ours, after all the struggles for good education, deliberately set the bar so low that you have to make a special effort to fail as a student in South Africa?
You talked too about the need to rethink development. I mean, some people talk about green growth, but perhaps there's an idea more of green development. What shape do you think development should take for countries like South Africa?
I think it needs to focus on enhancing human capability, and that includes the healing of the broken souls, but it also has to focus on human capital development, intellectual capital development, and social capital development to build that trust for people to be able to act as a collective in looking after the very scarce resources of our planet. And I believe when that happens, you will also have an ability to hold governments accountable to being proper stewards of the national resources and ultimately the planet resources. And that accountability has to also go to global institutions. As we heard this morning, it's very important that we move towards a much more cooperative and a more trusting environment, because we are also very tightly connected. And unless we use those connectedness opportunities for us to build a sustainable planet, we're going to destroy this planet.
We heard from Richard Williamson this morning, the author of The Spirit Level, that that inequalities in rich societies don't necessarily bring extra happiness, extra benefits of well-being and so on. When countries, developing countries like South Africa and others, look to rich countries, it's easy to think that they just want to be like them. But are developing countries learning from people like Richard Williamson, from people like yourself, that actually there is a different path? And are they beginning to think they want to go down that different path?
I think governments in those countries think intellectually they cannot argue with the Wilkinson approach of equality is good for everybody. Unfortunately, most governments in post-colonial Africa consist of wounded people. So the personal desire for having rather than being is really tearing them apart. So they say one thing and do the other. And so I don't think anybody disagrees with the fact that equality is good for everybody. But are we willing to make those policies and implement them that really live out those values? We have a fantastic constitution in South Africa that gives us the injunction to be a more equal society. But we don't live the dream. And part of the problem is this issue that individuals who are in the public service, in the private sector, in the government, are not interrogating their desire for more and more consumption rather than more and more reaching out to being better people.
And very briefly, how long do you think it will take to achieve that healing that you think is so necessary in South Africa before the country can move forward onto a truly sustainable development path?
I think it will take a short to medium term effort on all our part. And I have recently founded an organization called Citizen Movement for Social Change. And the drive of that movement is to educate South Africans about the need for them to pay attention to this woundedness, the need for them to educate themselves to understand what are the rights and responsibilities of a citizen in a constitutional democracy, which is different from a parliamentary democracy.
Dr. Ramphele, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, nearly 1 billion people in the world today are undernourished, and also millions more suffer from chronic diseases like obesity and diabetes from overconsumption of food. Now, here's another staggering statistic. Around a third of the food produced in the world for human consumption is lost or wasted. Oh, and agriculture, by the way, is also the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet because of land clearances and inefficient practices. Climate change and rising populations with demands for different foods are only threatening to make things worse. So against that grim background, later this morning a new report will be published here at Planet Under Pressure, outlining a detailed set of recommendations to policymakers on how to achieve food security for all. It's been put together by the Commission on Sustainable Agriculture and Climate Change, which is an independent group of scientific leaders from 13 countries. The Daily Planet now has a sneak preview because one of those commissioners, Professor Bob Scholes, from South Africa again, is with me now. Professor Scholes, welcome to the Daily Planet. 7 key recommendations. Briefly, what are they and what for you is the most significant of them?
To go through them all would be a bit tedious, but there are some ones which really stand out. The one you've highlighted already is the issue around waste. You know, in the world today, about 1/5 of all people are in some way malnutritioned, and the irony is that a fraction of those are obese and are eating, making very bad food choices on that side. But there's also close to 1 billion people who go to bed hungry or inadequately nutritioned, and so it raises the question, are we already in a food crisis? Well, not from a production point of view. We actually produce enough food for everyone to get a good diet. The problem is firstly a distributional problem and secondly a waste problem. And this is across both the developed and developing world. In the developed world, typically the waste occurs, at the kitchen. We throw away stuff, we buy stuff that we don't need. And in the distribution chain, getting to us. In the developing world, it's post-harvest lost. In other words, people are storing their own food and a huge amount of that goes to pests and things like that.
So waste is a huge issue, but as populations increase, as demand increases, the amount of land available for agriculture is being reduced perhaps by the effects of climate change, drought and so on. That presumably requires, and presumably your Commission says, a much greater intensification of agriculture. But that's controversial, isn't it?
Yes, it is controversial, and needlessly so, because when you do the sums, there's really no alternative. If we believe that we do need to feed everyone on Earth, and I think we take that as a given, that's a universal right, then the alternatives are really very stark. Either you expand into increasingly marginal lands where your production is much lower and at increasing cost in terms of biodiversity loss and impacts on the climate, or else you intensify. Now, there's a big pushback from countries which are arguably already over-intensified, so think Europe and maybe parts of North America, where we have an excessive use of input chemicals and perhaps an excessive fraction of the landscape devoted to agriculture, to say, no, don't go that route. But in fact, for the places where we really need to do agricultural development, it's far better to increase the production per hectare than to expand the hectares. And we can do that by carefully moving up that production chain and not going over the top.
How important is the role of technology in increasing the intensification of agriculture? GM, genetic modification, is of course controversial, the use of fertilizers. How important is technology? Is it the only way forward?
You absolutely can't achieve this without using best available technology, whatever the source of that is. And I think you have to treat it all with caution. Technology, as we know, is a Pandora's box. It's a powerful force for the good. It can also be, very detrimental. So we have to have open eyes and we have to be thoughtful about its use, but we can't succeed without the use of technology.
Many of the farmers in the world are not large, intensive agricultural operations we see in rich countries. I suspect the vast majority of farmers are very, very small farmers, small peasant farmers, small holdings, small areas of land. How important is it, or what can be done to make their productivity increase, to get them to make a greater contribution towards feeding the nations they live in?
Well, certainly they can do that. A well-managed small farmer can achieve just as much production as a large farmer on a per hectare basis, and can often do it with less damage as well. But I think we need to step back a bit from the focus on maximal productivity and maximal efficiency into understanding that agriculture is about more than food. And that might sound like a very strange statement, but it's also about, for instance, employment. Agriculture is one of the single largest employers in the world, and especially of the poor and the marginalized, and especially in these areas where there are, hungry people and growing populations. So as a provider of employment, it's incredibly important. It's also incredibly important in creating the kind of landscapes that we want to live in. Agriculture is a great shaper of landscapes. What do we want to live in? Do we want to live in, millions of hectares of soybeans in all directions, or do we want to live in a complex landscape which also has space for biodiversity, which also has space for cultural values? So we have to think of agriculture as not just being about how can we produce the largest amount of, wheat at the lowest possible price.
Bob Scholes, it's a fascinating contribution to the debate. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Now, earlier this week at the conference of Planet Under Pressure, we all went to the cinema. Top of the bill, the Green Screen Climate Flicks. I knew I'd get that wrong. The Green Screen Climate Flicks competition and its winners. The short movies made by young filmmakers and media artists who were challenged to come up with short, punchy messages about how we can all contribute to a low-carbon future. The initiative was launched by climate scientists from the University of Melbourne, Macquarie University and the Monash Sustainability Institute. We'll hear from one of the scientists in a moment, but first let's see the winning film made by students at the San Jose University in the United States.
Thanks, Green Ninja.
Oh, that's lovely. I love the Green Ninja. Well, with me now is Dr. David Griggs from Monash University, one of the climate scientists involved in this project. David, welcome. Why did you feel the need to have this competition?
Well, the competition was the brainchild of Anne Henderson-Sellers at Macquarie University, and I think it came out of a sense that I think we recognise as climate scientists we're perhaps not the best communicators in the world, and so this was a way of getting people who are good communicators to communicate the message and have a bit of fun at the same time.
They are amazing films. What is wrong with the way climate scientists communicate?
Well, I wouldn't say there's something wrong. I mean, we're scientists, so we have to communicate the science in our way. We can't say black is black. We can say it appears to be black, but we can't rule out the possibility that it might be dark grey.
Well, that, of course, doesn't get through to the vast majority of people who might be watching television interviews or listening to the radio or reading newspapers, because that's not the way they get it, is it?
That's not. And so we have to learn to communicate our message in a way that can be understood. Sometimes that's doing it ourselves and getting better at it ourselves. Another way is to try and work through intermediaries who are good communicators, journalists and so on, who understand the message and can communicate. And this is another way to try and get young people who are passionate about the issue to tell the message in their way.
Were you surprised by the degree of passion and enthusiasm shown by your filmmakers?
I was surprised how many entries we got. I was surprised by the variety. It was everything from live action films to cartoons to, you name it, we had everything. And just the variety of ideas that people came forward with. It was just a lot of fun to watch them all.
Did you get a sense that from this that young people are committed to these issues and want to do something about them?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I talk to young people. I go and talk in schools and youth groups and so on. And I think there's a real willingness on their part to really take it forward. And there are real youth groups around now. In Australia, there's the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, which are a really now powerful political voice in the country. They can walk into the Prime Minister's office because they represent hundreds of thousands of young people. And so that sort of grassroots activism among young people is really taking off.
How difficult was it to choose a winner?
It was very difficult. We had panels of experts and panels of people looking through the films, and we didn't agree. But I think we came to an agreeable conclusion about which one should be the winner. But we all have our personal favourites, and I think my personal favourite is going to be shown next, which I thought was.
Well, go on. What is your personal favourite? Tell us.
My personal favourite is Climate Zombies, and it's a bunch of young people who've clearly had a great deal of fun with a lot of red paint and a lot of makeup and blood and gore everywhere. Just talking about zombies cause climate change, zombies have had all these greenhouse gas emissions, zombies have caused all this, and at the end, of course, it says zombies aren't real, but climate change is. And I thought that was just such a great, fun way of getting the message across.
Well, David Griggs, thank you very much for talking to us. And let's take a look at your favourite film from this competition. David calls it Climate Zombies, but the official title is Blackout.
Here!
That is fantastic. That's lovely. I can see why that's David Griggs' favourite, Blackout, the Climate Zombies. Now, finally, at the conference here, one of the big important features has been the interactivity of it. People calling in and texting in questions to the panelists. We've had Twitter questions. We are, of course, broadcasting the sessions out on this web stream and the Daily Planet as well. The person behind much of that interactive nature is Andrew Merry. Andrew, how's it been going for you? Have you been surprised by how many people have contributed to the conference from around the world who can't get here to London?
I have actually. You know, before you start this, you're slightly nervous because you never quite know what the community is going to do, you know, how much are they going to get into it. And I think we've been really pleasantly surprised about the number of people that have engaged both within the Twitter community on the webcast. We found out that we've got people watching from Australia, from India, from Ghana, all over the world, and we've had I think on average around 3,000 to 4,000 people, watching the webcast, which is really great. And of course, those people aren't only just watching passively, but they're also sending in comments and questions. And sometimes it's really hard when we can't actually, get as many of those to the moderators in the panel as we'd like.
How much of a difference has it made to the conference, to the way the conference is flowing and running?
I think a huge amount. There's the real danger, I think, in these really big conferences that people feel really disengaged. These are really important issues. I think in a sustainability conference, it's even more important that people feel like their voice is being heard. So I think it's extremely important in the context of this, and that people can, have their own discussions through Twitter or SMS, as well as sort of engaging directly with the people on the stage.
And what sort of questions, what sort of things have been raised? What surprised you most?
Well, I think one of the things that came up a lot is there's a real focus on sort of equity issues, that people are picking up on. And I think that's really good to see, that it's not sort of focusing so much on the technocratic components of sustainability, but more thinking, well, how do we empower sort of women farmers in Africa and Asia, and those kinds of really important sort of core questions at the heart of sustainability. So I think that's great. Transcending
scientific disciplines, if you like, taking
Indeed.
people out of their silos.
Absolutely. It certainly doesn't feel like when you're listening to the scientific conversation that it's when you're listening to the conversation that it's just a sort of scientific conference. So,
well, we've got one more day to go, Andrew. I guess
Sure.
we need many more people to contact the conference and get their questions and their comments in. How can they do that?
Great. So there's a few ways they can do it. Obviously, if you're watching from around the world, you can go to planetunderpressure.net website, and you can watch the live stream and put the questions straight in there. Another option is if you're away from the conference or here on the day, you can text your questions, and all those numbers and details are on the website. And then, of course, if you're one of our very engaged Twitter community or want to become one, you can use the hashtag, which is the # Planet 2012, to follow sort of the whole conversation. And then if you'd like to ask questions, you can use hashtag #AskPlanet.
Andrew, Mary, that's great. Let's hope many more people get in contact during the final day tomorrow. Andrew, Mary, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And that's it from the Daily Planet for now. I'm back in an hour and a half with more from Planet Under Pressure, when we'll be exploring the controversial subject of geoengineering. And I'll be talking to one of the world's leading economists, Eleanor Ostrom, whose influential work on how we value, use and manage sustainably the resources we all share, like forests and fishing, won her the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2009. So until then, goodbye.